The sound of his hand hitting my cheek echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. A sharp, stinging heat bloomed across my face as I stumbled backward, my hand flying to the mark. The roast beef sat forgotten on the table as 12 pairs of eyes stared at me. Some were shocked, others satisfied. All were silent. My husband, Richard, stood over me, his chest heaving with rage. "Don't you ever embarrass me in front of my family again?" He snarled. In that moment, I wasn't his wife, I was just an obstacle, a problem he had just put back in its place. It was a silence I had known my whole life, the kind that makes you invisible. If they've ever acted like you weren't there until your absence echoed louder than presence, share your story. And if this feels like your table too, like and subscribe. My name is Clara, and for the last 15 years, my world has been defined by the quiet hum of a well-kept house and the heavy silence of unspoken words. This house, a sprawling two-story colonial in the manicured suburbs of Denver, was supposed to be a dream, a symbol of the life Richard had promised me when he slipped a diamond onto my finger, his eyes shining with what I had mistaken for adoration. But its pristine walls, painted in shades of beige and greige chosen by my husband from a designer palette, often felt more like the bars of a gilded cage. Every piece of furniture, every polished surface, was a testament to his success and his impeccable taste, while my own identity seemed to have been sanded down, primed, and painted over to match. My opinions on art, my preference for vibrant colors, my love for slightly chaotic gardens all had been gently, condescendingly dismissed as impractical or unsophisticated until they withered from neglect. My very essence had been gradually, methodically erased and replaced with his. Tonight was the pinnacle of that world, the performance for which all others were merely a rehearsal, the 40th wedding anniversary of Richard's parents. The air was thick with the rich, savory scent of rosemary-crusted roast beef and the cloying sweetness of apple cider simmering with cinnamon sticks on the stove. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of domestic perfection, designed to broadcast a message of effortless elegance and familial bliss. Every detail, from the hand-ironed linen napkins to the curated jazz playlist humming softly in the background, was a note in a composition I had perfected but no longer felt. It was all a lie, and I was its weary, lead conductor. A dull ache had settled deep in my bones, a familiar companion after 3 sleepless days of meticulous preparation. It wasn't just the physical toll of cooking, cleaning, and decorating. It was the psychic weight of impending judgment, the exhausting effort of holding a mask in place. I reached for the large porcelain platter on the highest shelf, the one imported from Italy that Richard insisted we use only for his family. As my arm stretched, the sleeve of my soft cashmere sweater, a birthday gift from Richard last year, chosen, of course, by his assistant, slipped down just an inch. And there it was, a faded yellow-green shadow on the delicate skin of my inner wrist. It was the ghost of a bruise from last week's argument, an ugly reminder blooming amidst the quiet perfection of my kitchen. The argument itself had been so trivial, so utterly meaningless, that its memory was almost absurd. I had mentioned wanting to sign up for a local pottery class, a small, selfish desire for something that was just for me, something to do with my own hands that wasn't scrubbing or polishing. I imagined the feeling of cool, damp clay spinning beneath my fingers, the simple, honest creation of something from nothing. Richard had looked at me with a kind of weary disdain, as if I'd suggested running away to join the circus. He'd spoken of the cost, the wasted time, the foolishness of it all, when I persisted, just for a moment. His fingers had closed around my wrist. The grip wasn't violent, not in a way that would leave a dramatic mark, but it was firm, a silent, powerful reminder of my place. "Don't be ridiculous, Clara," he had said, his voice calm, his grip unyielding. "Your focus is here." With a practiced, almost unconscious speed, I tugged the sleeve back into place now, my heart giving a single, hard thud against my ribs. It was a secret ballet of concealment, a dance of shame and survival I had perfected over the years. From the corner of my eye, I saw my daughter, Lily. She was 10, but her eyes, dark and serious like mine, held the quiet, solemn wisdom of someone much older. She sat at the polished granite island, a thick copy of A Wrinkle in Time open in front of her, but I knew she wasn't reading. Her gaze was fixed on me, her focus absolute, missing nothing. She saw the slight tremor in my hands as I arranged the roasted carrots and potatoes around the beef. She saw the forced brightness in my smile when I caught her looking. She had learned to read the subtle weather patterns of our home, to sense the atmospheric pressure shifts that foretold a storm. We shared a look across the kitchen, an entire, heartbreaking conversation passing between us in that silent, loaded moment. In her eyes, I saw my own exhaustion reflected, and a fierce, protective sorrow that no child should ever have to carry for their mother. I offered her a small, weak smile, a flimsy shield against a truth we both knew too well, hoping to convey a reassurance I did not feel myself. The sound of the garage door rumbling open sent a familiar jolt of adrenaline through me, sharp and unwelcome. Richard was home. His heavy, confident footsteps on the hardwood floor were a prelude to the inspection I knew was coming. He walked into the kitchen, a vision of corporate success in his tailored suit, his tie perfectly knotted. His eyes, however, immediately began their sweep of the room, not with appreciation, but with the critical, fault-finding intensity of a drill sergeant. He didn't greet me or ask about my day. Instead, he ran a finger along the gleaming countertop, inspecting it for a phantom speck of dust. "The house looks acceptable," he pronounced, his voice clipped and devoid of warmth. He walked over to the wine I had decanted an hour before, swirling the deep red liquid in its crystal prison. "Is this the 09? I hope so. You know Mother finds the 11 too acidic." He didn't wait for an answer. "Already moving on. I trust you remembered she prefers the French linen napkins, not the cotton ones." He then turned his attention to our daughter, his gaze dismissive. "Lily, what are you doing out here? Go to your room, the adults need to prepare." "But Dad." Lily's voice was soft, yet it held a core of steel that was entirely her own. "Mom has been working all day. Everything looks beautiful." Richard's gaze hardened, a subtle shift that made the air in the room grow cold. "Children do not question their fathers." "Lily, that's disrespect. It's a sign of poor parenting, which we will discuss later." He didn't raise his voice. He never did when he was like this. His anger was a cold, sharp thing, far more intimidating than any shout. "Now, go to your room." Lily's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. She gathered her book without another word, her small face a mask of disappointment. As she passed me, her fingers brushed against mine, a quick, tight squeeze of solidarity. The gesture was a small rebellion, a lifeline of love in a cold sea, and it almost broke my heart. Later, as I was setting the table in the formal dining room, carefully arranging the centerpiece of white roses I'd bought, I heard Richard's voice drift from his study down the hall. He was on the phone with his mother, Eleanor. His tone had changed completely. It was low, confidential, the smooth, charming voice he used to win clients and admirers. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the house was so quiet. His words carried as clearly as if he were standing beside me. "Of course, Mother. Everything is under control," he was saying. A placating, boyish warmth in his voice that he never used with me. There was a pause as he listened. "Yes, Clara handled it all. The food, the decorations. She's very capable in that regard." Another pause. Longer this time. I found myself holding my breath, the heavy silver fork in my hand suddenly cold and foreign, and then came the words. The casual, devastating words that would echo in my mind for the rest of the night, cracking the very foundation of my carefully constructed world. I know. It's just, sometimes I wish I hadn't chosen a wife who was so simple, so ordinary. The word simple hung in the air, a poisoned dart that found its mark with devastating accuracy. It wasn't an insult shouted in anger. It was a calm, considered statement of fact, a regretful sigh shared between a son and his mother. It was a dismissal of my entire being in that moment. All the air left my lungs, the years of trying, of striving for a perfection he would never acknowledge, of swallowing my own opinions and dreams to become the placid, supportive wife he required. It all collapsed into a single, crushing point of pain. The words confirmed a cold, terrifying truth I had long tried to ignore. To my husband, I was not a partner. I was a feature of the house he wished he could upgrade. The chime of the doorbell cut through my paralysis, sharp and demanding, "Showtime." I took a deep, shaky breath, composing my features into a mask of serene welcome before walking to the door. Richard's parents, Eleanor and George, swept in first. George, a man whose personality had long been subsumed by his wife's, gave me a perfunctory nod, his eyes already searching for the bar cart in the living room. But Eleanor's gaze, sharp and critical as a surgeon's scalpel, scanned me from head to toe before moving on to the house. She didn't miss the single strand of hair that had escaped my chignon or the slight flush on my cheeks. Her eyes darted from the floral arrangement in the entryway to the polish on the hardwood floors, her expression unreadable but implicitly judgmental. "Clara, dear," she said, her voice dripping with a manufactured sweetness as she kissed the air beside my cheek, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and disapproval. "The house smells lovely. You do try so hard." It was a classic Eleanor compliment, a gift wrapped in an insult, implying that my efforts, however strenuous, would always be the work of a novice, forever falling short of her innate standards. Richard's younger brother, Michael, and his wife, Sarah, followed. Michael, a paler, less successful version of Richard who mirrored his brother's opinions as if they were his own, immediately clapped Richard on the back, his face alight with a sycophantic admiration. He was the court jester to Richard's king, laughing a little too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Sarah, however, was different. She was quiet, often overlooked, a watercolor painting in a room full of harsh oil portraits. As she passed me to join the others, her eyes met mine for a fleeting second. In them, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years from this family: genuine sympathy, a silent acknowledgement of the performance I was being forced to endure. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, her gaze dropping to the floor as if she were afraid of being caught in this small act of treason. But it was enough to remind me that I wasn't entirely invisible. It was a tiny spark in a vast darkness. As I moved between the kitchen and the living room, carrying a silver tray of sparkling water with lime and the expensive wine Richard had insisted upon, the memory of a conversation with Lily from a week ago surfaced with startling clarity. The house had been filled with a tense, oppressive silence, the aftermath of another one of Richard's cold tirades over a misplaced bill. He had gone to bed, leaving me to tidy up the emotional wreckage. I was sitting in the dark of the living room, unable to sleep, just staring at the shadows dancing on the walls, when Lily had appeared, a small, silent figure in her unicorn nightgown. She didn't say anything at first, just climbed onto the sofa and curled up beside me, her small body a warm, comforting weight against my side. After a few minutes of shared silence, she held out her tablet, its screen illuminating her serious, determined face in the gloom. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible yet filled with an unnerving gravity. "I have to show you something. It's my school project about family communication." My heart had seized with a vague, formless dread, a cold premonition that I was about to cross a threshold. On the screen was a folder labeled Project Vance, my maiden name, a name that felt like it belonged to another woman in another lifetime, a woman full of hopes and dreams that had nothing to do with beige walls or French linen napkins. Inside were dozens of video and audio files, each meticulously time-stamped and dated. My daughter, my quiet, observant child, had been building an archive of our misery. She pressed play on one of the audio files. Richard's voice, tight and controlled with fury, filled the silent room. He was berating me for being 5 minutes late from the grocery store because of unexpected traffic. "Do you have any idea how that makes me look? Clara, unreliable, disorganized. It reflects on me." My own voice followed, small and placating, a pathetic murmur of apologies. "I'm sorry, Richard. I'll leave earlier next time. I'm so sorry." Listening to it, I felt a wave of shame so profound it was nauseating. It was the sound of my own submission, my own weakness, played back to me in high fidelity. "Lily, you can't," I had whispered, my hand reaching out to stop the tablet, to silence the evidence of my own cowardice. "This is dangerous. If he finds out—" "He won't," she had insisted, her small hand stopping mine, her grip surprisingly firm for a 10-year-old. Her eyes were clear and focused, without a trace of childish fear. "He never sees what he doesn't want to see, but you need to see this one. Mom, this one is important." She scrolled past several files, her movements precise and deliberate, to a video at the bottom of the list. The camera was positioned cleverly, hidden behind a stack of art books on the living room shelf, capturing the corner where Richard often took his important calls. The video showed him on the phone with his best friend and golfing partner, Mark, from 2 weeks prior. He was laughing, relaxed, a glass of amber liquid swirling in his hand. He looked happy, charming, the man I had first fallen in love with. Nursing school. Richard scoffed into the phone, repeating a question Mark must have asked. He took a slow sip of his drink, a smug, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. Can you imagine Clara as a nurse dealing with actual emergencies, blood and guts? It was for the best I put a stop to that nonsense years ago. He leaned back in his leather chair, the picture of contentment, a benevolent king surveying his domain. I couldn't have my wife earning more than me or, God forbid, thinking she was smarter than me. It's all about managing perceptions, my friend, a happy, simple wife at home. That's the perception that matters. It keeps things stable. The casual cruelty of his confession, the pride in his voice as he admitted to sabotaging my only real dream, had stolen the air from my lungs. It wasn't just that he had stopped me with his constant discouragement. It was that he had actively, deliberately destroyed my application, something I had never known for certain until that moment. The memory, sharp and vivid, came rushing back, a forgotten trauma unlocked by his boastful words. I was 25 again, full of a nervous, brilliant hope. We had only been married a year. The mail came on a Tuesday, a thick, cream-colored envelope from the University of Colorado's College of Nursing. My hands had trembled as I held it, the weight of it feeling like the weight of my future. I had waited for Richard to come home to open it, wanting to share the moment with him. He had arrived late, smelling of scotch and success after closing a big deal. I presented the envelope to him like a prize. He'd taken it, his smile tight. "Let's see then," he'd said, slitting it open with a letter opener from his desk. He pulled out the papers, his back mostly to me, and scanned them. For a long moment, he was silent. Then he sighed, a heavy, theatrical sound of disappointment. He turned to me, his face a mask of practiced sympathy. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry, it's a rejection." He'd folded the letter and put it back in the envelope before I could see it. "Don't you worry," he'd said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a cage. "You don't need that stress. Your job is here, with me. We'll build our life together." I had cried, and he had comforted me, and a part of me had died that day without me even knowing it was murdered. He had intercepted a letter of acceptance. I was sure of it now. He had seen my future and decided it was not compatible with his. That night, sitting in the dark with my daughter, I realized the faded bruise on my wrist was nothing. It was a superficial injury, the real wound, the one he had inflicted on my soul 15 years ago, had never healed. The what-ifs I had buried for so long unearthed themselves, raw and bleeding. What if I had become a nurse? What if I had my own career, my own independence, my own name on a bank account? Who would I be now if not for his careful management seeing that video? I finally understood that my life hadn't just happened, it had been engineered, my potential deliberately and methodically capped by the man who had promised to cherish and protect me. That knowledge had settled in my heart like a shard of ice. And now, standing in my own living room, serving drinks to his adoring family, that ice began to spread through my veins, cold and sharp and clarifying. Later, in the quiet safety of my father's house, Lily would tell me about the terror of those weeks. She described it not as a grand plan, but as a series of small, terrified acts of courage. The first time she decided to record him, her hands had shaken so badly she almost dropped the tablet. Richard had been in one of his cold rages, his voice a low, cutting monotone as he dissected a meal I had spent hours preparing, calling it pedestrian. Lily, hiding in the hallway, had propped the tablet inside a decorative vase, her heart hammering against her ribs so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She only managed to record 30 seconds before she snatched it back, her breath catching in her throat, convinced she would be discovered. The close call came a week before the anniversary dinner. Richard was looking for his car keys, storming through the house, throwing cushions off the sofa, his frustration mounting with every passing second. Lily had just finished recording one of his abusive phone calls to a subordinate and had hastily hidden the tablet under a magazine on the coffee table. Richard, in his frantic search, picked up that very magazine. Lily told me time seemed to stop. She could see the corner of the black tablet peeking out. Her blood ran cold. She was sure it was over. But Richard, so consumed by his own irritation, so utterly oblivious to the world outside his own needs, didn't even notice. He tossed the magazine aside, found his keys under a newspaper, and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Lily said she had collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, the tablet feeling like a live grenade in her hands. It was in that moment. She confessed that she knew she couldn't stop. The risk of being caught was terrifying, but the risk of letting him continue was unbearable. Dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression, with Richard's family as the virtuosos and me as their silent, unwilling instrument. We sat around the mahogany dining table, the candlelight flickering across their satisfied faces, making shadows dance in the hollows of their cheeks. The roast beef, cooked to a perfect medium rare, sat carved on its platter, a jewel of culinary effort they took for granted. The conversation flowed around me, a river of carefully constructed barbs designed to highlight my perceived inadequacies. Eleanor, seated at the opposite end of the table like a queen holding court, spoke at length about a friend's daughter who had just made partner at her law firm in New York. It's just so inspiring to see a young woman with real ambition, with a fire inside her, she declared, her eyes flicking to me for a brief, dismissive moment. Some women are content to simply exist, to manage a household. It's a skill, I suppose, but it's not a legacy. You're lucky you don't have that kind of stressful life, aren't you? Clara. I murmured something noncommittal, the muscles in my face aching from the effort of maintaining a pleasant smile. My smile felt like a crack in a porcelain mask, threatening to shatter and reveal the rage simmering beneath. Richard didn't defend me. He never did. In fact, he seemed to bask in his mother's approval. He raised his wineglass, the crystal catching the light. To ambition, he said, his eyes meeting his mother's in a look of shared, smug understanding. The toast was a dagger, and they all knew it was aimed at me. Michael, eager to please his older brother, then launched into a story about a disastrous dinner party his colleague's wife had hosted. He described her failed souffle in painstaking, humiliating detail, complete with dramatic hand gestures mimicking its collapse. And the poor woman just stood there, wringing her hands. On the verge of tears, he guffawed. It's what happens when people try to punch above their weight. The implication was clear. A direct shot across the table, this is what happens when incompetent, simple women try to do things. Sarah, his wife, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze fixed on her plate. She tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, mentioning a new art exhibit downtown, but Michael talked right over her, his voice booming. The entire time, I felt Lily's presence beside me, a small tense knot of silent fury. She had barely touched her perfectly cooked meal. Her small hands were clenched into tight fists in her lap, her knuckles white, her gaze, sharp and unnervingly analytical for a 10-year-old, darted from face to face, cataloging every slight, every condescending tone. She was not just a child at a family dinner, she was a witness, gathering testimony as the predators circled her mother. The final cut, the one that severed the last thread of my composure, came from George, my father-in-law, a man who usually remained benignly silent. A passive observer in his wife's social warfare turned to Richard with a face beaming with paternal pride. "Son, you've done well for yourself," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful home, a successful career, and a wife who knows her place is supporting her husband." The phrase "knows her place" landed on the table with a physical thud. It was not just an insult, it was a verdict. It was the final seal on my worthlessness. The official family doctrine, spoken aloud and endorsed by the patriarch, the ice in my heart, which had been spreading all evening, didn't just spread, it solidified, becoming a hard, cold, unshakable resolve in that instant. Something inside me shifted permanently. I could no longer sit there and pretend. I needed air. I needed a plan. I needed to act. "If you'll excuse me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady as I placed my napkin on the table and rose from my chair. "I need to check on the dessert." The lie was thin, a flimsy excuse, but no one questioned it. They were too absorbed in their own self-satisfaction. As I turned and walked towards the kitchen, I felt all their eyes on my back, but for the first time, I didn't care. A moment later, I heard the soft scrape of Lily's chair and her light, determined footsteps following me. She found me in the kitchen, leaning against the cold stainless steel refrigerator, my hands gripping the counter to keep them from shaking. The pristine white of the cabinet seemed to mock me. I was breathing hard, as if I had just run a marathon. She didn't ask if I was okay. She knew I wasn't. Instead, she walked over to the small kitchen island where her tablet lay, its screen dark. She picked it up and held it out to me, her small body radiating a strength that belied her years. Her expression was no longer that of a child, it was the face of a determined ally, a co-conspirator who had been waiting for her moment. "Mom," she whispered, her voice low and urgent, a captain giving a command. "It's time. You have to do it. Now." On the screen was a drafted email. The recipient was already filled in Colonel James Vance. My father. The subject line was stark. Just 2 words, family matter. Below it, a short, simple message Lily had composed, Grandpa. "I need you to see this. Please watch all of it. We need your help." Attached was the entire Project Vansive folder, a meticulously curated library of my husband's cruelty. Each file a nail for his coffin. All that was left was for someone to press the small blue icon that said send. For a heart-stopping moment that stretched into an eternity, I hesitated. My world narrowed to that glowing blue button. This was the point of no return. This was not just leaving a marriage, it was detonating a bomb in the middle of our lives. And the fallout would be unpredictable, messy, and public. My hand trembled as I reached for the tablet. The fear, a physical thing, a cold knot in my stomach. I saw my fear reflected in Lily's wide, dark eyes, but then I saw something else there too, something that burned away the fear, unwavering faith. Faith in me, in us. My mind raced. I thought of the nursing school application, of the pottery class, of 100 small dreams Richard had extinguished with a casual word or a dismissive look. I thought of the bruise on my wrist, a secret I had kept for him. I thought of his voice on the phone, calling me simple. Most of all, I thought of my daughter, my brilliant, brave daughter, forced to become a soldier in her own home, forced to document the slow erosion of her mother's spirit. The trembling stopped. My finger hovered over the screen, a silent declaration of war. Then, with a firm, final tap that felt like breaking a chain, I pressed down. The icon vanished. A small notification appeared at the top of the screen, email sent. A wave of pure, terrifying, exhilarating freedom washed over me in the same breath. My knees felt weak. I leaned heavily against the counter, my lungs taking in their first true gulp of air in years. We had done it. The fuse was lit. From the dining room, I could hear the sound of their laughter, oblivious and carefree. It was the sound of a world that no longer existed. When I re-entered the dining room, Lily at my side, a strange, almost glacial calm had settled over me. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface like a distant engine, but it was overshadowed by a cold, clear certainty. The mask I had worn for 15 years, the one of placid compliance and gentle smiles, had been discarded in the kitchen. The woman who returned to the table was someone new, someone they had never met. I took my seat, my movements deliberate and unhurried. The chatter at the table faltered for a moment as they registered my return, their eyes holding a flicker of curiosity before resuming their self-congratulatory banter. They saw me, but they didn't truly see the change, not yet. Eleanor, noticing my empty hands, raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a gesture of mild impatience. "No dessert, Clara, don't tell me you've forgotten it. A special occasion like this requires a proper final course." I looked directly at her, across the expanse of polished mahogany and flickering candles. I did not smile. "No, Eleanor, I haven't forgotten," I said, my voice even and calm, yet carrying a new weight that made Michael pause with a wineglass halfway to his lips. "I was just thinking about legacies. You mentioned them earlier, how some things, like ambition, create a legacy, while other things just exist." A confused silence fell over the table. This was not in the script. I was not supposed to engage, only to absorb. Richard shot me a warning look from across the table, a sharp, angry glint in his eyes that promised retribution later. But I ignored him. For the first time, his silent threats felt powerless. I continued to hold his mother's gaze. It's made me realize that everyone leaves a legacy of some kind. Some are built on success and ambition, others are built on cruelty, on the quiet, methodical destruction of another person's spirit. It's fascinating, really, what we choose to build with the time we're given. "What on earth are you talking about?" Clara Eleanor asked, her voice losing some of its syrupy sweetness, replaced by a brittle edge of irritation. "You're not making any sense. You sound hysterical." "Am I not?" I replied, a real small smile touching my lips for the first time that night. It felt foreign, like stretching a muscle I hadn't used in years. "I think I'm making sense for the first time in a very long time." I turned my gaze to my husband, pinning him with it. "Some people have their ambitions managed for them, don't they?" "Richard, it's all about perception. After all, keeping things stable." The color drained from Richard's face. He recognized the words, his words, the confident, rosy flush from the expensive wine vanished, leaving behind a waxy, pale sheen. He knew, in that instant, that I had somehow seen the video, his carefully constructed world, built on my ignorance and silence, had just developed a fatal crack. "Clara," he said, his voice a low, menacing growl, each word a stone. "That's enough." "Is it?" I asked, my voice still quiet, a stark contrast to the violence brewing in his eyes. "After 15 years of this performance, I don't think it's nearly enough." I let my gaze sweep around the table, at their stunned, uncomprehending faces. "You all sit here, in my home, eating the food I cooked, and you speak of my place. You toast to ambition while knowing your son actively sabotaged mine. You watched him diminish me, year after year, and you said nothing. You are all complicit." "How dare you?" Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her pearls, a gesture of theatrical outrage that rang completely hollow. But it was Richard who moved, pushed past the edge of his control, his mask of the charming, successful patriarch shattering into 1,000 pieces in front of the very audience he sought to impress. He lunged to his feet. His heavy chair scraped back violently against the floor, the sound like a scream. Rage, pure and ugly, contorted his handsome features into something I barely recognized. I said. He hissed, leaning across the table, his knuckles white where they pressed into the wood. "That's enough." And then his hand came up. The motion was swift, a blur of white cuff and gold watch. The sound of his palm striking my cheek echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. It was sharp, definitive, a sound of utter violation that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. My head snapped to the side, the force of it sending a spray of stars across my vision and the sharp, coppery taste of blood into my mouth where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. A hot, stinging pain bloomed instantly across my face, a fiery handprint marking me. The room went utterly, profoundly silent. The only sound was the faint, high-pitched ringing in my own ears. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch and warp. I could see everything with a horrifying, preternatural clarity. George's fork, laden with roast beef, frozen halfway to his open mouth, his expression one of bovine stupidity. Michael's face, a mask of slack-jawed shock, a dribble of wine escaping the corner of his lips. Sarah, his wife, had both hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with terror and a strange, vindicated horror, as if she was witnessing something she had always suspected but never wanted to see. Even Eleanor looked stunned, her face pale and suddenly aged, finally realizing that the ugly truth of her son's nature had just been laid bare on her anniversary dinner table. And Lily, my brave, brave Lily, had risen from her chair, her small body trembling not with fear, but with a righteous, incandescent fury, her face a storm of outrage and tears. But no one spoke, no one moved. The silence was absolute, a thick, suffocating blanket of shock and shame, and into that silence, a new sound intruded. It was modern, jarring, utterly out of place in the tableau of primal horror, a cheerful, chirping ringtone. Every head swiveled towards the source. Richard's phone, lying face up on the table beside his plate. The screen was lit up, bathing the white tablecloth in a pale blue glow, and on that screen, in stark black letters, was the caller ID. It did not say Dad or James, it said, with full military formality, Colonel James Vansa. If Richard's face had been pale before, it was now the color of ash. The rage vanished from his eyes, replaced by a primal, gut-wrenching fear I had never seen in him before. This was not a business associate he could bully, or a wife he could silence. This was my father. He knew, with the certainty of a condemned man, that this was not a social call. His hand, the same one that had struck me moments before, trembled visibly as he reached for the phone. He fumbled with the screen, his finger slipping twice on the smooth glass before he managed to answer. He put it to his ear, trying to compose himself, to salvage some shred of authority from the wreckage of the last few minutes. "James," he said, but his voice cracked, coming out as a weak, strangled croak. "Hello, we're just in the middle of dinner." There was a pause. From across the table, I could not hear the voice on the other end, but I didn't need to. I knew its timbre, its command, its utter lack of patience for fools and bullies. I saw the answer in the way Richard's body seemed to shrink, to collapse in on itself as if under a great physical weight. His eyes were wide, fixed on some distant point of horror. His knuckles were white where he gripped the phone, so tight I thought it might crack. Then a few words from the earpiece carried across the silent room, just loud enough for me, and perhaps Eleanor to hear. The voice was not shouting, it was far worse. It was calm, controlled, and colder than a winter grave. "Richard, I've seen the videos." A pause that felt like a lifetime, a pause in which I could feel the entire balance of power in the room shifting irrevocably. "I'm on my way, don't you or your family go anywhere." The call ended. Richard didn't move. He just sat there, phone still clutched in his hand, his face a mask of utter, abject terror. The final dawning realization was spreading across the faces of his family as they looked at him. Not with admiration, but with a new, dawning fear. The polite, passive-aggressive dinner party was over. The real reckoning had just begun. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one that had followed the slap. That had been a silence of shock. This was a silence of dread, thick and heavy with the anticipation of impending doom. It was finally broken by Eleanor. She pushed her chair back, the sound grating in the stillness. Her face, which had been pale with shock, was now mottled with red, her eyes burning not with sympathy for me, but with a furious, terrified indignation aimed squarely at her son. "Richard, what have you done?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that carried across the room. "Videos, what videos? What is that man talking about?" She wasn't asking for the truth of his actions. She was asking about the extent of his carelessness. Her fear was not for the pain he had inflicted, but for the scandal he had brought to their doorstep. I I don't know," Richard stammered, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route that no longer existed. "She's manipulating things. It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like," Michael chimed in, his earlier sycophancy curdling into panic. He stood up, knocking his wineglass over, a dark red stain spread across the white linen tablecloth like a pool of blood. "Richard, a colonel in the army doesn't make phone calls like that over a simple misunderstanding. What did you let her record, my God? Our family name, our business?" He ran a hand through his thinning hair, his face slick with sweat. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a new kind of contempt, the contempt for someone who has upset the comfortable order of things. George, my father-in-law, finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. His jowly face was slack with confusion and fear. "You hit her, son," he mumbled, stating the obvious as if it were a complex puzzle he had just solved, in front of all of us. "You hit her." It was then that Lily stepped forward. She moved from behind my chair into the space between me and the table, a small, solitary figure facing down the ruins of her father's family. Her tears had stopped, her face was calm, her small chin held high. The incandescent fury had cooled into something far more formidable, a cold, unwavering resolve. "He's not just talking about tonight, Grandma," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through their panicked whispers. It was the voice of a prosecutor, not a child. "I have been recording my father for 43 days. I have videos of him shoving Mom into the refrigerator. I have audio of him calling her stupid and worthless. I have a video of him throwing a coffee mug at her head because she bought the wrong brand of beer." She delivered each sentence like a hammer blow, each one chipping away at their desperate denial. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth again, while Eleanor simply stared, her own face a mask of horror as the ugly, hidden truth of her perfect son's life was laid bare by her own granddaughter. Lily then turned her gaze fully on her father. Richard flinched, actually flinched, as if her eyes were a physical weight. "And that's not the worst video I have, is it?" "Daddy," she continued, her voice dropping slightly, drawing them all in. "The worst one is the one where you're on the phone with Uncle Mark's friend after your golf game, the one where you're laughing, the one where you bragged about how you made sure Mom never went to nursing school." She let the words hang in the air. This was the masterstroke. This wasn't just about his temper, it was about his character. A calculated, malicious act of sabotage that painted him not as a man who lost control, but as a cruel, insecure tyrant. "You told him you couldn't have her being smarter than you," Lily said, her voice relentless. "You said you intercepted the letter from the university and told her it was a rejection. You said a simple wife was better for your image. That was your legacy. Wasn't it the one you chose to build?" The room was utterly silent again. The accusation was so specific, so vile, that it left no room for doubt. It was the truth, and its impact was devastating. Richard finally broke. A choked, animal sound escaped his throat. He looked at his daughter as if seeing a monster, failing to realize he was looking in a mirror. And at that precise moment, we all heard it. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, the clinical sweep of headlights cutting through the dining room windows, momentarily illuminating the horrified faces around the table like actors in a spotlight. Two car doors slammed shut with grim finality. Heavy, purposeful footsteps sounded on the front porch. They were here. My body felt strangely light, as if I were floating. I didn't move to answer the door. This was no longer my responsibility. Richard remained paralyzed in his chair, a man trapped in the wreckage of his own making. The doorbell rang, a single, firm, authoritative press that brooked no delay. My father did not wait for an invitation. The front door opened and he filled the doorway, not just with his physical presence, but with an aura of absolute command. He was in civilian clothes, a dark jacket and gray slacks, but he might as well have been in full dress uniform. His silver hair was neatly combed, his posture ramrod straight. His face was a mask of controlled fury, his jaw tight, his blue eyes cold as chips of ice. Behind him stood two other figures. One was a man in a discreet, dark suit, his build athletic, his eyes sharp and observant. He had the unmistakable air of law enforcement. The other was a woman, perhaps in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a sharp, professional pantsuit and carried a leather briefcase. Her expression was calm, neutral, and utterly implacable. My father's eyes swept the room, taking in every detail in an instant: the overturned wine glass, the stunned faces of the family, the fiery red handprint on my cheek, and me, sitting amidst the ruins. His gaze lingered on my face, and I saw a muscle jump in his clenched jaw. It was the only sign of the rage I knew was boiling beneath his disciplined surface. He then looked at Lily, who stood protectively by my side, and his expression softened for a fraction of a second, a silent acknowledgement of her courage. He stepped into the house, his companions following, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere from a tense family drama to a formal proceeding. "Richard," my father said, his voice quiet, yet it commanded the attention of everyone in the room, "I believe you know why we're here." Richard could only shake his head, speechless. The woman with the briefcase stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. She placed her briefcase on a side table and opened it with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Richard Whitman," she asked, her voice professional and clear, devoid of any emotion. Richard nodded dumbly. "My name is Miss Albright," she said. "I am an attorney. And this?" She gestured to the man in the suit. "Is Detective Miller with the Denver Police Department?" Eleanor made a small strangled sound. The police. The word hung in the air, a final damning confirmation of their disgrace. "Detective Miller is here to serve you with an emergency protection order," Miss Albright continued, pulling a sheaf of papers from her briefcase. "It was granted by Judge Harrison moments ago. Your father-in-law is a very thorough man, Mr. Whitman. We had the petition prepared and on standby, waiting only for confirmation of an imminent threat which you so graciously provided tonight." She let that sink in before continuing. This order requires you to immediately vacate this residence. You are to collect only your essential personal belongings, a wallet, keys, phone, and one change of clothes. The rest of your property will be handled at a later date. You are to have no contact, direct or indirect, with your wife, Clara Vance, or your daughter, Lily Whitman. This includes phone calls, text messages, emails, or communication through any third party. Do you understand? Richard stared at her, his mind clearly unable to process the swift, brutal efficiency of his downfall. "This is my house," he whispered, the words pathetic and weak. "Under the terms of this order," Miss Albright said, her voice unwavering, "your wife has been granted temporary exclusive occupancy of the residence due to credible evidence of domestic violence. If you refuse to comply, you will be arrested immediately. The choice is yours." She placed the papers on the table in front of him. The reckoning was no longer coming. It had arrived. Richard stared at the papers on the table as if they were a venomous snake. The stark, black and white text represented the complete and utter demolition of his life, and his mind, so adept at bullying and manipulation, simply could not process it. He looked up, his eyes wild and desperate, searching the faces of his family for an ally, for someone to join him in his outrage. But he found nothing. His mother, Eleanor, had sunk back into her chair, her face a mask of horrified disbelief, her social standing crumbling around her. His father, George, simply stared at his plate, unable to meet anyone's eyes. And Michael, his loyal lieutenant, was already inching towards the door, his only thought clearly being self-preservation. They had abandoned him. The family he had prized above all else, the audience for whom he had performed his entire life, was leaving him alone on the stage. His gaze finally landed on me. The desperation in his eyes was a raw, pathetic thing. "Clara," he whispered, his voice breaking, "please, tell them this is a misunderstanding, a terrible argument that got out of hand. We can fix this. Please. Clara, don't do this to our family." For 15 years, that plea in different forms had been my command, his needs, his desires, his comfort. They had been the guiding principles of my life. But the woman he was pleading with no longer existed. I rose slowly from my chair. The strange calm still settled over me like a shroud. I walked around the table until I stood directly in front of him, looking down at the man who had been the architect of my silent suffering. The stinging on my cheek was a fiery reminder of the truth. "A misunderstanding?" I asked, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of every tear I had ever shed in secret. "There is nothing left to misunderstand." "Richard." I leaned in closer, my voice dropping so that only he could hear. "A final private verdict. You didn't just hit me tonight. That was just the last note in a very long, very sad song. You hit me when you convinced me I was too stupid for nursing school. You hit me every time you called me simple and ordinary behind my back. You hit me when you stood by and let your family tear me apart just so you could feel like a king." I paused, letting the words sink in. "You didn't just steal my confidence. Richard, you stole my future. You stole the woman I was supposed to become. There is nothing left to misunderstand." I straightened up, the finality of my words hanging between us. I looked at him one last time, a stranger with a familiar face, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty pity. I turned my back on him and walked over to where my father and Lily were waiting. My father placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, a silent gesture of support that spoke volumes. I reached down and took Lily's small, warm hand in mine. Her fingers curled around mine, strong and sure, together. The three of us turned and walked out of that house, leaving the wreckage of Richard's life scattered around the mahogany dining table. The sound of the front door closing behind me was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of freedom. The drive to my father's house was a blur of streetlights and silence. Lily fell asleep in the back seat, her small body finally succumbing to the exhaustion of a battle she should never have had to fight. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the darkened city, my reflection a ghostly image in the window. The fiery handprint on my cheek had cooled to a dull, throbbing ache. My father drove with a quiet, focused intensity, his hands steady on the wheel. His house was a small, neat brick bungalow, the kind of place that spoke of order and discipline. Inside, it was immaculate, filled with books and polished wood, a stark contrast to the cold, designer perfection of the house I had just left. It felt like a sanctuary. He led us to a guest room, the bed already turned down, a fresh glass of water on the nightstand. He had been ready. After I tucked a sleeping Lily into bed, her face finally peaceful. I found my father in the kitchen, making tea. He didn't speak at first, just handed me a warm mug, his movements gentle and deliberate. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said finally, his voice thick with an emotion I had rarely heard from him. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Tears I didn't know I had left began to well in my eyes. "It wasn't your fault. Dad, I was good at hiding it. I was ashamed." "There is no shame in being a victim," he said, his voice firm, the colonel returning for a moment. "The shame belongs to the one who raises his hand." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a fierce, protective love. "You are safe now, both of you. That is all that matters." Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. The bruise on my cheek was a dark, ugly flower against my pale skin. But for the first time in years, I looked past the bruises, past the tired, frightened woman I had become. And I saw a flicker of someone else, a girl with fire in her eyes, a girl who had once dreamed of being a nurse. She was still there, buried but not gone, and I knew, in the quiet safety of my father's house, that I was finally ready to let her out. The legal battle, when it came, was not a battle at all. It was a demolition. A few weeks after that night, we met in Miss Albright's sterile, intimidatingly quiet conference room for a preliminary hearing. Richard was there with his lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man who oozed false confidence. Richard himself looked diminished, his tailored suit hanging slightly off his frame, his face pale and drawn. He tried to project an air of wronged authority, of a man besieged by a hysterical wife and a manipulative child. His lawyer began, his voice smooth and reasonable. He spoke of a long, loving marriage that had hit a rough patch. He painted me as emotionally unstable, prone to exaggeration. He suggested that Lily was a troubled child, easily influenced, who had concocted a fantasy to gain attention. It was a disgusting, predictable performance, and I felt a familiar wave of self-doubt begin to creep in. Then it was Miss Albright's turn. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't resort to theatrics. She simply opened her laptop, connected it to the large screen on the wall, and pressed play. The first file was an audio recording. It was Richard's voice, cold and sharp, berating me for the grocery bill. "Are you an idiot, Clara? Do you think money grows on trees?" It was followed by my own small, terrified apologies. She played another, and another, each one a small, ugly snapshot of our life. Then she played the video, not the slap, but the one that was far more damning, the video of Richard, laughing with his friend, boasting about how he had sabotaged my future. I couldn't have my wife earning more than me or, God forbid, thinking she was smarter than me. His voice echoed in the silent conference room. "It's all about managing perceptions." Richard's lawyer began to object, but Miss Albright simply held up a hand. "This isn't about a momentary loss of temper. Mr. Whitman," she said, her eyes fixed on Richard. "This is about a 15-year pattern of calculated, deliberate, emotional abuse designed to control and diminish my client. The physical violence was merely the final, ugly punctuation mark on a very long sentence." Richard's composure shattered. He lunged to his feet, his face contorted with the same ugly rage I had seen at the dinner table. "She's lying, they're twisting everything." "Are they, miss?" Albright asked calmly. "Then I invite you to explain this video to the court and the other 42 recordings we have, and the testimony of your daughter, who has proven to be an exceptionally credible witness." He had no answer. He collapsed back into his chair, a broken man, finally and irrevocably defeated not by shouting or by tears, but by the simple, undeniable weight of the truth. The fight was over before it had even begun. 1 year later, the world was a different color. The oppressive beiges and grays of my old life had been replaced by the vibrant, sun-drenched hues of a new city and a new beginning. Lily and I lived in a small, bright apartment with a balcony overflowing with flowers I had planted myself. The restraining order had become permanent. The divorce had been swift and uncontested. Faced with the mountain of evidence Lily had gathered, Richard and his family had wanted nothing more than for the scandal to disappear as quickly as possible. I got more than half of everything, including the proceeds from the sale of that house, which I never wanted to see again. Richard, I had heard through the legal channels, had lost his prestigious job due to a morals clause in his contract, and his reputation was in tatters. His consequences were his own. I wasted no time thinking about them. My focus was on my own legacy now. Today was my graduation. I had enrolled in an accelerated nursing program and had poured every ounce of my reclaimed self into it. I had not been simple. I had not been ordinary. I had been at the top of my class. As I sat on the stage with my fellow graduates, dressed in a navy blue cap and gown, I scanned the audience, and I saw them. My father, sitting tall and proud, his usual stern expression softened by a radiant smile. And beside him, Lily, no longer a small soldier, but a beaming, happy 11-year-old, holding a bouquet of roses for me. When my name was called Clara Vances, the applause from my small family was the only sound I heard. I walked across the stage, my steps confident and sure. The dean shook my hand and placed the diploma in it. It was just a piece of paper. But to me, it was everything. It was the future I had reclaimed. It was the life I had built for myself. As I walked back to my seat, I looked out at my father and my daughter. Lily was waving frantically, her face alight with pure joy. My father simply nodded, his eyes shining with a pride that filled my heart to bursting. I was no longer an object in someone else's life. I was the protagonist of my own. And my story was just beginning. 3 years after that fateful night, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I was in my small but sunny apartment, the one Lily and I now called home, grading papers from the nursing students I was now teaching. Life had a beautiful, circular rhythm to it now. I almost let the call go to voicemail, but some instinct made me answer. Clara, the voice was hesitant, thin, and carried the ghost of a memory. It was Sarah, my former sister-in-law. I was silent for a moment, a phantom chill running down my spine. We hadn't spoken since that night. Sarah, I finally said, my voice neutral. I know you have no reason to talk to me, she began, her words tumbling out in a rush, and I don't deserve it, but I had to call. I had to tell you, I'm sorry, Clara, I am so sorry. I could hear her crying softly on the other end. I was a coward. I sat there year after year and watched what they did to you, what Richard did to you. And I said nothing. I was so afraid of them, of losing my own comfortable life, and I've lived with that shame every single day. I listened, my heart a still, quiet thing in my chest. The old anger, the burning resentment I had once felt, was gone. It had been replaced by a calm, sad understanding. I left Michael, she continued, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. A year ago, the whole family, it just rotted from the inside out after you left. It was all built on Richard's success and Eleanor's social standing, and when that disappeared, there was nothing left but bitterness. Eleanor and George live like recluses. Michael blames Richard for ruining the family name, for losing him clients. They haven't spoken in years. It's all gone, Clara, all of it. She took a shaky breath. I saw you that night. When you stood up to them, it was the bravest thing I've ever seen. It took me 2 more years to find even a fraction of that courage, but I did. And it was because of you. I needed you to know that. I thought for a long moment. Looking out my window at the city lights twinkling in the twilight, I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who would have either wept with vindication or hung up the phone in anger. But that woman was a ghost. Thank you for telling me, Sarah, I said, and I was surprised by the genuine warmth in my own voice. I'm not the person to forgive you. You have to forgive yourself. I hope you find your own peace. I truly do. We spoke for a few more minutes, 2 women who had escaped the same shipwreck, now standing on different shores. When I hung up the phone, I didn't feel a sense of victory or revenge. I felt a profound sense of closure. Their world had imploded, a natural consequence of its own toxicity. My world, the one I had built with my own 2 hands, with the help of my daughter and my father, was bright and full of promise. I walked into the living room where Lily, now a confident, happy teenager, was sketching in her notebook. She looked up and smiled, and in that smile, I saw our future. We hadn't just escaped, we had won, not by destroying their world, but by creating our own.